Yo, what's up everyone? My name is Yura, and we're taking a little bit of a break from Clash because I just have an itch in me and I have to scratch it, and it is to talk about yet another Meadowlands deck. If you're here from the Clash videos and you don't know what Meadowlands is a Time Wizard Yu-Gi-Oh format that takes place in May of 2013. It's kind of like in the mid portion of the Xyz era, right before things kind of get out of control with the Dragon Rulers, and it is a format that I absolutely adore to no end. It's got plenty of low to the ground decks, it's got crazy combo decks, it's got just a lot going on with it. And today, for those of you who are familiar with Meadowlands format, this is kind of a weird one. So Psychics, specifically Psychic Synchro, is a deck type that has existed in Yu-Gi-Oh since the dawn of the 5Ds era. I don't know if it was exactly at the start of that era, but around that type is when the actual monster type of Psychic got introduced, and over the course of time they gained some new members. And honestly, in the next set after Meadowlands, the Lord of the Tachyon Galaxy set that brings the Dragon Rulers, there is a crazy E-Telly target that shows up in there, but we unfortunately don't have access to it. So instead, we are playing a series of cards that I just kind of refer to as the self-banished Psychics. They are a group of Psychic type monsters that all revolve around banishing other Psychic type monsters from the graveyard in order to then get them back to the field to make synchro plays. This kind of play style is something that does exist a decent amount in Meadowlands. There's a lot of decks that are trying to set up a nice little resource loop. Mermail probably being the most egregious example, because that deck spits out so many bodies so unbelievably fast, and it just kills people into the sun, and it's a lot of fun to pilot. This deck, however, is much more grounded. It plays, I don't want to say slower, but its general resource loop is a little slower to start. However, when it does get going, it can do some really neat things. So right off the bat, I want to talk about the actual core members of this not archetype, and right off the bat, I have to talk about Serene Psychic Witch. This is arguably the most important card of the entire deck. She is a level 3 Psychic non-tuner that, when this card on the field is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, you can banish a Psychic type monster with 2,000 or less attack from your deck, and during the next standby phase, if this card stays in the graveyard, you can special summon the monster banished by this card's effect. Serene Psychic Witch is kind of the foundation on which the rest of this archetype is built. Her effect only proccing on destruction is a little weird, but we can make decent use out of it through some various means. However, her actual search effect, or rather her banish from deck, is really, really nice. It lets us access basically any Psychic type monster in our entire deck. The ones that are over 2,000 attack, I've actually pulled up every single monster in here that mentions Psychic, are genuinely not that good, and the one that we would actually want to get off this effect, Overdrive Teleporter, cannot be special summoned through any means whatsoever. When looking at Psychics in general historically, it's always kind of tempting to want to play a card like Overdrive Teleporter, because on paper, this is a card that reads summon 2 from deck, which can net you either an Xyz monster play or immediate access to a 9-star synchro, of which there are a few that are, I don't want to say worth making, but they're not terrible. However, I do think, and it's exceptionally true when looking at a format like this through a historical lens, Teleporter is just not it. The things that it can set up are very funny, you can set up for Miracle Synchro Fusion plays, which is a very funny card that I was on for a little bit in this deck because it was just neat. I don't know, I like the funny cards that say do a crazy thing for wild setup. They're never really good, but they're fun to play with. And the other main reason why we're not on it is because of the prevalence of Effect Failure and Maxi to a certain extent. There are hand traps in this format that will stop you from doing anything, and for the cost of needing to open this guy and to find tribute fodder for it, and then has the gall to cost your normal summon, and on top of that, cannot be recurred through any means necessary unless you're doing very specific setups where you're trying to add it back to your hand through either, I think it's where is it? Genetic Woman, I think, can add a Psychic from Banished. Yeah, there's also a spell card that does it, but they are so unbelievably specific. Yeah, Psychic Path that it just does not feel worth it to even consider using Teleporter in the first place, because the advantage that it does net you is just not great overall, unfortunately. So, with Teleporter out of the way, let's talk about the actual rest of the deck that rounds this archetype out. Silent Psychic Wizard is probably the best normal summon in the deck, other than Hushed Psychic Cleric, which we will touch on in a moment. Psychic Wizard is on normal summon. You can target a Psychic type monster in your graveyard and banish it, and then if this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, you can special summon that banished monster. This is incredible. It is a little slow, but it's a 1900 body, which in a format like this is actually not that small. It contests Fire Fist names with a tanky up, and it can also beat over something like a Lavalval chain, which does genuinely kind of matter, because chain is such an absurdly important part of this format that there are decks that will just set up a chain and then pass, and if you don't out that chain, you are in for a terrible, terrible time. Psychic Wizard and all of the psychics that we do care about in this deck are all Earth type, which is important for a very specific reason. Technically, it's two specific reasons. It's the Naturia Synchros. All of these cards are just incredible advantage engines to make the most broken Synchro monsters in the entire format, Barkion and Beast. You can also make Landois. I don't like Landois' cost. Having to pitch a spell card from hand is really not great. And a lot of the spell cards in our deck are really, really good, and we don't want to just send them to the graveyard for no benefit. But back to the main deck though, Hushed Psychic Cleric is the other good normal summon. It is a level 3 Earth Psychic non-tuner. All of these are non-tuners, by the way. Like, we'll get to the tuners in a moment, but for now, these are all non-tuners, and they will pretty much be the only non-tuners you use. There are some others that I'm going to touch on a little bit later in the video, because I think there are some that are maybe worth considering that just aren't in here yet, because, I don't know, this deck has been a nightmare to build, I'm going to be honest. If you couldn't tell by now, that the fact that we're like 8 minutes into this deck profile and I haven't even touched the spell cards yet, this is a bit of a different deck profile, because this is a deck that I have been working on for quite a while, and it is something that I really enjoy, and the theory for developing it has been an absolute blast, and I love just yapping about it. But back to Cleric. Cleric is on normal or flip summon, change it to defense position, so it's Summoner Monk, kind of. And once per turn, you can send a card from your hand to the graveyard, then target a Psychic in your graveyard, banish it, and if this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, target one monster banished by this card's effect and special summon that target. Notably, this does not have to be the monster that you banished that turn. It can be any monster banished by this effect, which doesn't matter too much, because ideally this card is not staying on the field for longer than a turn. You can kind of sit behind its 2100 butt, but like, I'm gonna be honest, in a format where Mermail is running around and can kill you on turn 2, a 2100 body is not going to be enough to save you. But it is an important part of the engine, and it being a 3 non-tuner, much like Witch, does come up, but unlike Witch, it also benefits us when it goes to the graveyard, which is very important. Onto the tuners, we've got Double Psychic Commander. If you're familiar with Edison, you know this card. It's fine. There is a separate level 3 Earth Psychic tuner that I think could fit this spot, and honestly, it might even be better for it too. The only reason why I'm on Commander over it, and I'll pull that up just real quick. Level 3, where is my friend? Mental Seeker. There it is. So Mental Seeker is functionally the same thing, except its stats are lower, and it also does not contest 1900 beaters like Psychic Commander does. Commander is very simple. During the damage step, when a Psychic type monster you control battles, you can pay life points in multiples of 100 up to 500 to have the monster it's battling lose that much attack and defense. This can let your Sound Psychic Wizard get over some like genuinely kind of weird things. But mostly this card allows itself to also contest Fire Fist names that are only backed up by a tanky, which there are some decks in the format that do have that. Anything that is not pure Fire Fist, something like Fist Gladiator Beast or Dino Fist, will kind of do that general thing. But this card also can beat over Lavalval Chain, which, as I mentioned in the Wizard part of this deck profile, that does genuinely come up, especially against decks that aren't necessarily at the top of the meta. A lot of rogue decks are just very content with using a chain to either send or stack, and then going off next turn. Even Infernity in certain hands will have to rely on a setup turn like that to really pop off. But Mental Seeker in its place is a decent replacement. It shares all the same stats. It's a level 3 Earth Tuner, as I've already mentioned, and it does also have an additional effect that procs when it is summoned from the Banished Zone, much like the Esper Girl that we'll talk about in a moment. Mental Seeker will, on special summon from the Banished Zone, reveal the top 3 cards of your opponent's deck, and you can choose one of those cards and remove it from play, and then shuffle the others into the deck. It's like a bootleg Kashtira Ogre, which is in and of itself not bad. I just don't know if I personally value that over clearing Lavalval chains or other weird Xyz monsters that just have like decently high stat lines. I think there is maybe a world where you can swap the two and be totally fine. The main reason why I am talking about it in a deck profile that does not actually have it in the main deck is because I think this is a totally fine substitute and is probably just up to personal preference. Going on to our level 2 tuners though, Esper Girl is the other most important part of the deck, because this card is a level 2 Earth Psychic tuner that when it is special summoned from the Banished Zone, you can remove from play the top card of your deck face down, and then when this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, add that removed card to your hand. It is a draw that doesn't say draw. And you know what? That's fine. It's good enough. It's advantage. It gives us a reason to continuously recycle it from the field to the grave to the banished, back to the field to the grave to the banished, and we do that fun little right triangle from the field to the grave to the banished zone. This card's great. Its level is really helpful. There's a lot of really potent 6s and 8s that it can help make when paired with a Silent Psychic Wizard. One of them, of course, being Barkion. It also is our main way of making Naturia Beast because it's a 2 plus a 3 with Cleric, or even a Serene Psychic Witch if you need to. It's just a really great card. I would be playing 3, but genuinely, it is not a card you necessarily want to draw. It is just a card that you want to have fairly consistent access to, but you want to be getting access to it off your like Serene Psychic Witches instead of just drawing it by itself, because on its own, it really doesn't do that much. The only other level 2 Psychic we're playing is Psychic Jumper, and this guy is the only main deck monster that is not a hand trap to have space in our side deck, and it is for a very good reason. Psychic Jumper is Creature Swap printed on a monster that you can get out of deck with the 3 of E-Telly. Why this is the case, I have no idea, but it's incredible. I have won so many games in testing off of this very specific interaction of going Psychic Jumper, pay 1,000 life points, target a Serene Psychic Witch you control, and an opponent's anything. I've found a lot of fun stealing big Synchro monsters or a big Xyz monster, taking it for yourself, and then using that monster to crash over the Psychic Witch, which then pluses you by getting an Esper Girl out of the deck and into the Banished Zone where you want it to be. It's so good. I would honestly even consider bumping this to 2 in the main, but the only reason why it's not there is because while yes, this card is a ridiculous effect and it is very easy to access, on its own, it does nothing. In fact, it does less than nothing. This card, if it is the only psychic you find, is functionally you hitting the surrender button on yourself, which is why we're playing the free 4 extender Photon Thrasher. So in those instances where all you really have access to is Thrasher plus, I don't know, like Witch or Wizard or even just like a random 2 tuner, it does come up to have the ability to go summon Thrasher, and if it's Wizard, make Lavalval Chain, either stack your deck or set up your graveyard, or even Diamond Direwolf to out something weird. Or something that I really like in theory is go Thrasher, E-Telly for Psychic Commander, make Black Rose. That is a Black Rose that you just did not have to use your normal summon for. And then you can follow it up with anything, like a Silent Psychic Wizard is a fantastic get here. This is actually one of the main reasons why I'm considering swapping the Psychic Commander for the Mental Seeker, because that play specifically, where you have Thrasher, Wizard, E-Telly, lets you go Thrasher plus E-Telly, make the Black Rose, summoning the Mental Seeker, and then you can go normal summon Silent Psychic Wizard to go Mental Seeker, Banish from Graveyard, and then suddenly you have not an interruption, but a method of taking advantage away from your opponent. That could be like an important starter or a solid one of which there are many of in Meadowlands. I think it is maybe another reason why I could consider cutting the commanders for the Mental Seekers. It is just not a change that I have tested enough with to know if it will really make that much of a difference. But it is something that I'm definitely considering. The only other monster that we're playing in our deck is Effect Veiler. This is just kind of like the best all-around hand trap that I found. You could probably play Maxx C in this slot and it would be like maybe fine. DD Crow is good in time travel and in Time Wizard specifically for Dark World and Infernity, and that's about it. The hand trap lineup is pretty interchangeable if you have something in Meadowlands that you like, or even you could like swap these out for trap cards. I was on Needle Sealing before because they proc the Serene Psychic Witch effect, which is pretty neat. They would also proc all of your like Earth Psychic guys when they go from field to grave. It's just like another option, and more like field-wide removal is really good. I just wasn't finding the space for it when I was on Effect Veiler, so that's why it's not in here. Onto the spells though, these are kind of the highlight of the deck. We'll talk about Instant Fusion in a moment because that is more of an elongated discussion for the reason you might see in the extra deck, as we are on 3 different Instant Fusion targets. But we're on all the staples, Heavy, Dark Hole, Foolish, Reborn, Book of Moon, because this deck just kind of has space for it. The other generics were also just like on the Double Solemns. The Double Torrential is very good in this deck because all of your monsters give you advantage when they leave the field. It's very similar to something like Scrap that I know I have not talked about on the channel, but is a jank deck that I really adore, and it is something that I want to put more time into because I just think they're fun, and they pair nicely with like the Mech Lords, which is very silly. Same honestly goes for the gadgets. I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but it really just kind of shows that I love this format to absolutely no end, and I will yap about it for literally ever if given the chance. As for the other generics though, the triple MST is kind of just a staple. Everything's on it because it's just that good. We're on double reasoning because, and this kind of goes back to what the deck is trying to do, and that is make a synchro monster ideally every turn, but it's Meadowlands, so that's not going to happen. But the big problem with this deck, and you may have already kind of guessed at it, is your first turn play is a really dependent on you finding a way to put 2 bodies on the board turn 1. And if you can't do that, your mid game will very likely fall apart extremely quickly unless that one monster is Serene Psychic Witch. And on her own, she's like fine, but it can always be better to back it up with another one. So the reason we're on reasoning specifically is because every single monster that we could potentially find off this is a way to advance our board state in a way that we do really want. It puts psychic type monsters on the board to fuel like the rest of our effects. It can get additional levels on the board to make your synchro plays. Like the second body does genuinely matter when the only thing in your hand is like a Serene Psychic Witch or an Esper Girl, because that does genuinely happen. It can also help you set up for a Psychic Jumper play. If you're going second and your post side, maybe the second jumper came in, that reasoning can help you find the second body that you can use to do the creature swap effect. But genuinely, the main reason it is in here is to improve your going first turn, because otherwise, this deck really does kind of suffer from its inability to make any substantial plays without its resource loop set up. And without it, it will just be sad, and you will be sad for it. E-Telly is kind of a card that I really don't need to describe. This card is literally everything this deck could want. Free summons of any psychic in the deck except for Wizard. It makes synchros really easy to make. It makes Xyz monsters easy to make. It does literally anything you could ever want it to do. It is the perfect extension and starting tool for this deck, and I cannot overstate how happy I am to have this card at 3 in this format. It is ridiculous how potent this card is. Every opening hand you see with this card is a significantly better hand than any other hand you could draw with this deck. That is how powerful this card is. The last spell card in the main is Instant Fusion. And the reason why I saved this for last is because talking about Instant Fusion means I have to talk about the Synchro Pool. And that is going to be a decently long talk. So, Instant Fusion is generally a fantastic card. I think any deck built for Meadowlands format should at least be considering Instant Fusion. It is a free body for literally anything you want to do. It is Xyz material fodder for up to level 5. In certain decks, it can be extra tribute fodder for things like Frog Monarch or Hieratic. It can fulfill type requirements on certain things, like Carbonala Warrior is a decent 4, then that's the one that we're on. It can fill type requirements for Xyz monsters. It can fill type requirements and attribute requirements for Synchro monsters as well. It is just such an absurdly versatile extender that I genuinely feel like any deck not running it is likely weaker for it, unless the deck very specifically either cannot benefit from it in any conceivable way, which there are not many of, but there are a few, or those slots are better used on other pieces of the engine that do a very similar thing, or, and this is the only other or that I will give it, your extra deck space is just too tight. If you're playing a crazy FDK or you're playing like a Quasar spam deck, which there are a couple of. Fabled is one of my favorite decks in this format because it spits out Quasar and it's really fun to play. But even that deck could probably make better use of Instant Fusion if I just retooled the deck list. But the reason why it is so important in this deck specifically is because we have a 3, a 4, and a 5 Earth target, which means any Psychic Tuner plus Instant Fusion makes any Naturia Synchro you want. The only downside is if you find exactly a 3 tuner and Instant Fusion. Then you are locked out of Beast. But any 2 tuner plus Instant Fusion is any of them. If you choose to play Landois, you can play that. On top of that, it also opens up the entire rest of your Synchro pool. You can make 4s through 8s of basically whatever you want. Although the 4, you need to use Effect Failure as your tuner, so that one's a little weird. But this opens up the Synchro pool a lot. And while the Synchro pool in Meadowlands isn't fantastic, it does still have a lot of really powerful cards in it. Scrap Dragon is maybe like in one of the best slots it could be outside of like, I think Mermail can use this pretty well because it can pop Lind, but we can do the same thing by popping any of our Psychic Banish Engine guys to get their effects off. Specifically, it works really well with Serene Psychic Witch because it functionally negates its like cost of having to pop one of your own cards because it will just recur that advantage in the next standby phase. Stardust Dragon is generically good. I already talked about Black Rose Dragon. Gaia Knight is only in here because the 6 pool is like really, really bad. There are a couple of Psychic type specific synchros that I have really been considering adding to this extra deck, and I'm only on one of them, and we'll talk about why I'm on it in a moment. But like, Psychic Nightmare is in theory a 3400 attack monster, but this card loses to, I think, 3 different scenarios. 1, a hand trap, specifically Effect Failure. It's you put everything into a 2400 body. Congratulations. You could have done better by literally making a 5, because Catastor would just outweigh that. 2, Mermail Abyss Gaios. Abyss Gaios is 2 points against this card. 1, Psychic Nightmare, while Gaios is on the field, cannot attack. It is a level 5 or higher monster, and Gaios says no to that. 2, even if you tried to guess it right, and you for some reason could attack, Gaios just negates it because it's original attack. So it doesn't matter. So this card's bad. It like doesn't out anything that's important. And it's also incredibly RNG reliant. And also the final nail on the coffin is if this card was generic, you could maybe consider it, but it needs a Psychic type non-tuner, which is just kind of frustrating on a card that for the most part will read do nothing. So we don't play it. Life Transfer, I think, is like good in Edison format. and that's it. It is a 7-star 2400. We could just make Black Rose instead. There's no reason to be on anything else. Thought Ruler Archfiend is a very interesting card that has been in and out of this deck multiple times, and the reason why it's not currently in there is threefold. 1. Thought Ruler only affects spell trap cards. Very specifically, how this card works is when a spell trap card is activated that targets one psychic monster and no other cards, you can quick effect, pay 1,000 life points, and negate the activation, and if you do, destroy it. Multiple problems with this card. It does not stop board wipes. It does not stop monster effects, which we would really care about. If this thing could stop the Fire Fist effects, that would be ridiculous, but unfortunately that's not the case. It can't beat hand traps because, again, does not stop monster effects. Doesn't beat Bottomless Trap Hole. That card doesn't target. Doesn't beat any of the Solemns. They don't target. They just negate. The things that it does beat are like limited already. It's like Book of Moon, Mindcon, and then some other generally unpopular picks like Breakthrough Skill, and I'm sure there's others. I'm just completely blanking on them. But regardless, the pool of cards that this card actually deals with is really low. And unfortunately, its attack stat loses out to Scrap Dragon, which, as we've already talked about, is a really good card. Magical Android, again, just like Life Transfer, good in Edison's format, not great here. The 9s are where it gets kind of interesting. The 9s are weird. I think they're maybe better in a world where you're playing Teleporter, but we're not, so meh. But also, the only one that's really good in that scenario is Psychic Blaster. And Psychic Blaster is like, it deals piercing and then heals you. So while a 3k body is like not nothing, it's kind of whatever. Like, who cares? But finally, the only Psychic type synchro to actually make it into the deck is Overmind Archfiend. Is this card good? Gonna be honest, could not tell you. Maybe. I think maybe. So Overmind Archfiend is a level 9 Dark Psychic Synchro that requires a Psychic type tuner and 2 or more non-tuner Psychic type monsters. And once per turn, you can select a Psychic type monster in your graveyard, banish it. When this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, special summon as many monsters as possible that were banished by this effect. This card reads like Soul Charge with the proper setup. On top of that, it is a 3,300 body, which is absolutely massive. But the main reason why we're on this is because while, yes, it is kind of weird to make being a level 9, we can sometimes just put 3 bodies on the board. It does happen. It does genuinely come up. A lot of it has to do with like reasoning plus e-telly, but this card is such a cool finisher. It is so unbelievably sick. And it's realistically the only big synchro boss that I would actually really be considering, specifically because when it does get outed, and it will get outed, do not try to pretend that this card will win the game on its own. It has no protection for itself, but getting things back when it is inevitably removed is really, really sick. And it is one of the major ways how you can recur resources through an otherwise potentially lost state. Hey all, Editing Yura here. As I was kind of going through this section, I came to a realization that I just forgot to mention one of the most important parts of Overmind Archfiend and why it does actually earn its slot. A lot of the other Psychic type monsters, and namely like Overdrive Teleporter, cannot be special summoned back. Overmind Archfiend, once you make it a single time, Hush Psychic Cleric and Sound Psychic Wizard then just become a method to recur a 3,300 body repeatedly while you're also getting further advantage making other synchro plays. So while yes, the things that I mentioned are important for why it's good, it's not the only reason. It is just the fact that it is a massive recurable boss monster that also helps you keep your general engine online. As for the Xyz monsters, we're only on the 4 good, like generic ones. Diamond Dire Wolf is in here as an out to Ophion because otherwise we cannot play our deck. Lavalval Chain is just generically good. It sets up literally anything that we could ever want. Leviar the Sea Dragon is really nice in this deck. It lets us speed up our self-banish effects by a turn by turning any 2 3s into a way to get like an Expert Girl back from the banish zone. And Zen Mains is just there to like help us stall. We do have a lot of ways of putting 2 3s on the board. Onto the side deck, we've got triple Max C, triple DD Crow that I've already mentioned, the one Psychic Jumper, again, that I've already mentioned, one Minecon because it is a fantastic sideboard piece, double Bottomless, double Mirror Force. They're just generically good trap cards that we want to put in when being forced to go first. And we can take out some of our other, like, maybe not as good tools that would normally be for going second, or maybe Valor doesn't have a good matchup. We could swap it out for like a Bottomless Trap Hole or something. The final card in this deck is Lightning Vortex. I don't know if I really need to talk about why Raigeki is good, but it is. But it's also Raigeki that sets up our graveyard. If you can go Lightning Vortex, pitch Esper Girl, summon Silent Psychic Wizard, you're in such an incredible position. This card is so unbelievable for going second. I adore it. It is so much fun to play with. And honestly, I don't think I would change much about this side deck. I think it's been pretty good to me, except for maybe the DD Crow, but I currently don't know what would go in that slot. Maybe just like a Floodgate or something. It's like probably a Floodgate. As for the rest of cards that I would maybe consider putting in here, I think Krebons is of course a good card, but like, I think it's just kind of outdone by Jumper and Esper Girl, and I don't really have the space for it. And it's also like not an Earth, which makes making like Beast and Barkion kind of weird. There is a 2-card combo in here that I think is very interesting, not for this deck, but for a variant of it that plays Macro Cosmos. Time Escaper is a very interesting card. It is a level 2 Earth Psychic that reads, during either player's turn, you can discard this card, target a Psychic type monster you control, and banish it until your next standby phase. And the main target for this is DD Telepon, which is again a level 2 Earth Psychic that reads, if this face-up card you control is banished, banish a Psychic type monster with 1500 or less attack from your deck. Then, during your next standby phase, if this card is still banished, special summon that monster banished by this effect. These two cards pair really nicely together, and I think in a world where you are just like setting up a loop where all of your psychics just go to banish and you play out of that banish zone using cards like the spell card that I mentioned earlier, the one that adds 2 back from banish zone, Psychic Path, or of course like Macro Cosmos to just kind of like stun your opponent out of the game. There are a couple of cards that do kind of facilitate that general game plan. I just think that version of the deck is maybe a little bit worse. Generics for this deck, though, Psychokinesis is a really solid card that I would maybe consider putting in. If the Lightning Vortex is ever not feeling too great or the DD Crow is just not doing enough, I think Psychokinesis is a really solid side card. Psychic Feel Zone is another really interesting card. This is kind of for that like Psychic Banish deck. It is functionally like Miracle Fusion for Psychic type synchros, but as we've kind of already discussed, a lot of those aren't great, so meh. I don't know. You can maybe play around with this, and if it works great for you, great. I would love to see different variations of this deck come to light because I think it's super, super cool. Brain Research Lab is the only other spell card that I think is really maybe worth talking about. It is a field spell with an absolute boatload of text on it, but it functionally boils down to if you would pay above life points that you would normally pay to like die, you can instead put a counter on this card instead, and then when this card leaves the field, you will take damage equal to 1,000 times the amount of counters on the card. And the same applies to acting as a double summon for any Psychic type monsters. They will both put counters on this card, and when it is destroyed or leaves the field through any means, its controller will take 1,000 damage for each counter on it. The double summon effect is the one that we genuinely do care about, and while it's good, I don't know if it's worth finding the slots for because the rest of this deck feels really, really tight. As for the trap cards, though, there are, I think, 2 of them that are really intriguing to me. Mind Over Matter is very similar to Hieratic Seal of Banishment, the Omni Negate. I think that's what that one is. It is very similar to that. It is a counter trap that reads, when a monster would be normal special summoned or a spell trap card is activated, tribute to Psychic, negate the summoner activation, and if you do, destroy that card. Much like Hieratic Seal of Banishment, this card pairs really well with things like Silent Psychic Wizard or Hush Psychic Cleric or Esper Girl because they all proc when being sent to the graveyard. The only thing it doesn't work well with is Serene Psychic Witch, but ideally you have other means of getting that effect off. And it's also just on top of that, like an Omni Negate. It's Judgment that pluses you, really. That's what this card reads. The only problem I have with it is that it is much like Hieratic Seal of Banishment, kind of only good going first, and only if you see it alongside other ways to your engine, so it just kind of feels like overkill. The other card that is maybe worth talking about is Brain Hazard. It's Call the Haunted for your Banished Zone, which, by the way, totally forgot to mention it. We're on Call the Haunted in this deck because, yeah, Reborning Serene Psychic Witch is really good. That's literally it. Sorry, I just forgot to talk about that. My bad. Brain Hazard is a very similar thing, but for the Banished Zone. Main problem is I think this card works well in a deck playing Macrocosmos because ideally the psychics that we're banishing come back because that's kind of how these effects work. So you can maybe use it to get a card out of your limbo zone, but I don't think it's super necessary. Okay, that has talked about all of the major components of the card pool that kind of are relevant. However, I do think it is worth talking about other versions of this deck that you could potentially play. Historically, Psychics were also played alongside the TG monsters. And the main reason for this is because, much like Serene Psychic Witch, they all kind of proc off of being destroyed and sent from your field to the graveyard. So they proc off a lot of the same things that we'd be doing already to get Witch into the graveyard through like our own means. If our opponent gets over them, so be it. But Striker plus Werewolf and even like Rush Rhino as a search target, they are also good ways of making use of the Naturia Synchros. The main reason why I'm not on them is because I think Instant Fusion fills this role better because it is purely generic, can be used for Xyz monsters in addition to synchro plays, and just generally are less weird to play around, although they do take up your extra deck space. The other way that I've seen this deck played, and I've already kind of mentioned it, is Miracle Synchro Fusion. If you are unfamiliar with this card, Miracle Synchro Fusion reads, Fusion summon a fusion monster from your extra deck by banishing fusion materials listed on it from your field or graveyard, including a synchro monster that lists it as material. If the set card is destroyed by your opponent's card effect and sent to your graveyard, draw a card. This card is used to make Ultimate Axon Kicker using any Psychic type synchro monster and a Psychic type monster. And this card is very simple. It can't be destroyed by card effects, deals piercing, and gives you life points back. It is functionally Hyper Psychic Blaster that cannot be destroyed by card effects, for the cost of 100 less attack and playing bricks. Now, to the astute among you, you might have already realized why we're not playing this card. It's the bricks. This deck already has trouble getting to its ideal board state, and drawing Miracle Synchro Fusions that don't do anything early in the game just kind of makes that worse. So with all that out of the way, I have yapped for so long about this deck, and honestly, if given the opportunity to do so, I would probably yap for another like 45 minutes about this because I just love this deck so much. It is so rad, the things that this deck gets to do. However, I do understand that not everyone wants to watch a feature-length movie about an anime boy just yapping about cards that functionally in this format are not really meta relevant. They are just kind of like existing. And while historically they were fairly popular because people just wanted to play something that wasn't Fire Fist or Mermail, when looking back on them from a modern perspective, they maybe fall a little bit short. But that being said, I do want to show this deck off. So we've got some games queued up. We're going to hop into those. All right. Got some games lined up. One full best of 3 match and a single game here. And you might be wondering, Yura, what in the world is this hand? Why are you on Lightning Vortex in the main? And why is Overdrive Teleporter here? 2 things. 1, this is a post-board game against Ninja Dragoonity, which is a sick deck, by the way. It's super cool. But this is a version 1 of the deck, so to say. This is before we ended up cutting Overdrive Teleporter. And I want to kind of show this specific match off to show why Overdrive Teleporter specifically is really not worth the space. To start things off here, we're going first. We draw into a Hush Psychic Cleric off the top, which is pretty nice, but it's not exactly where we want to be. We do have a Veiler for this Hanzo, which is incredible. It gets us to be able to stick this Cleric on the board so we can tribute summon it for the Overdrive Teleporter. But if you're staring at your opponent's hand here, you can see that they have an effect Veiler. So even though we get to go this Lightning Vortex and summon the Teleporter is now doing nothing and walks straight into a Mirror Force. And it wouldn't have survived anyway because our opponent and us both have Dark Hole in hand, so our opponent's gonna go Hanzo, get the effect, get the super transformation, which is great for them, but we are just like sitting on a bunch of power spells. And don't get me wrong, these spells are crazy. We have the 3 best 1-ups in the entire format sitting in our hand. We just need a way to engine. So our opponent's going to kind of combo off a little bit, get us down extremely low, down to exactly 100. And thankfully for me, we just have the 4 craziest cards in the entire deck sitting in our hand. So we're going to go Heavy to beat the Stardust, Darkhold to clear the rest of the board, Reborn to get the Stardust back, swing in for 25, and pass it back to our opponent. They just need to find any single monster. They're going to go Darkhold and then set. Unfortunately, I don't think they have another Dragoonity name in hand, or this might be at a point where they were unfamiliar with the fact that you could just do it like that, but they're going to find Hans off the top anyway and then swing in for game regardless. Okay, on to our actual match, and this is up against Karakuri, which is definitely a rogue deck, but it's like a decently powerful rogue deck. It does a lot of the same things that we can do, where it just spits out Naturia Synchros, but it also, while doing so, generates an absurd amount of advantage through its main synchro monsters, the Bure and Bure Do, which just summon guys out of deck and then draw additional cards when positions get changed. They are ridiculous cards, and this deck can make really good use of it. So our opponent's going first. They're going to top into Effect Failure, which is brutal for us. They're going to go the Solar Windjammer into the Ninishi, and then extra summon the Inashichi. I don't know these cards' names. They're going to go Strategist after making a Bure Do, and then sync off for a Naturia Beast. And I'm going to be honest, our hand here has exactly one out to this, and it is to make the Gaia Knight and beat over the Naturia Beast so we can actually get this Foolish Burial going. I think that send of the Export Girl there was probably incorrect. It was maybe just better to go for the Witch, and then next turn go into Thrasher plus Instant Fusion to make the Lavalval Chain, but it's not going to matter too much. Our opponent is going to be able to continuously combo off because their resource loop is intact while ours is in the dirt. We do get to MST this warning, but honestly, we've got 2 cards in hand, now with 3 with the Call of the Haunted, starting down Bure, Buredo, and a Zen Mains. It's going to be really difficult to break this board. Damn near impossible with the Veiler in hand, too. Our opponent's also sitting on a Darkhold, so even if we do manage to clear the board, they top deck into an Effect Veiler, so even though we get to go this Call the Haunted and stave off their attack for this turn, we are currently drawing into literally nothing, and they get to pop our Call the Haunted where we draw into an MST and then scoop it up. Okay, game 2, and our hand is looking pretty similar, but because we are post-board, we do have the Maxian main, which helps a lot, especially against Karakuri, which is a deck that just wants to summon literally everything in one turn, so we can get multiple draws off that. And we also have the benefit of being able to go first here. So we're going to go Thrasher, get immediately Max Seed, so we're just not going to take the challenge. We're going to set the Witch and the Call of the Haunted, which is decent enough. It gets our resource loop actually online. They're going to go Solar Windjammer into the normal summon of the Strategist. We're going to drop a Max Seed to try and get some additional draws, but they're just going to go with Stardust because I think they fear the Mirror Force. They're going to run over our Witch, which is going to get us access to our Esper Girl. Esper Girl's then going to banish something. We're going to Call the Haunted, get the Witch back, summon the Psychic Jumper, and this is exactly the use case of what I talked about Psychic Jumper for during the deck profile. It can out anything that can't just like negate the jumper effects, or if there's like a Veiler or something. And because we get to do this, not only do we proc the Esper Girl off the Synchro Summon of using the Thrasher here, we're also going to make a Naturia Beast because we just have access to a 3 on board, and then we get to, if we were able to go to the battle phase before our opponent scooped it up, crash over the Serene Psychic Witch to get another Esper Girl in rotation, or even like a Cleric, and then just continuously drown them out in advantage. Game 3 of this set, and our hand is looking really solid. We don't really have a decent way of getting into our like actual resource loop, but we've got Lightning Vortex, Heavy Storm, and Lavalval Chain set up, which is like probably good enough in the long run. Our opponent's hand is looking a little worse than normal, although I think they do have something. I don't actually fully know how Karakuri works. I'm going to be completely real with you. I do know that Strategist is a really good find for them. So they're going to go Strategist, Instant Fusion to make the Bure Do, because you can summon a 5 off that. They're going to go the Ninishi, extra normal summon to make a Bure. Summon the Strategist out of the deck, and then they can go the Bure Do to get an extra draw. They're going to go E-Telly to summon another level 3 tuner from the deck. I think in an ideal world, they would have summoned something to make a Churia Beast there, but I don't know if they actually play the proper target for that, which is why they went for the Zen mains, which does, in like theory, help them stay alive for an extra turn. And this Lightning Vortex would have really just ruined their day. But because we were able to out so much of their board with such little investment, we are feeling really good, and drawing the Reborn is even better. So we're going to Reborn this Buredo, go Lavalval Chain to stack our Serene Sacred Witch and set our Call the Hunted. We're going to bounce into this Nanishi, unfortunately, but our opponent is only on 2 cards, and they've drawn their second E-Tele target, so unfortunately that's functionally 1 card, and they're just going to scoop it up because they cannot contest our board. So where does this leave Psychic Synchro? I'm going to be honest, I've had a lot of time to think about where I think this deck lands, and it's definitely not in the meta. I don't think this deck will ever consistently take swings at things like Mermail or Infernity, Firefist Dark World, or Evil Swarm. I think those are the big 5. Oh, Spellbook, sorry, not Evil Swarm. Although Evil Swarm's probably up there too. But like, those 6 decks are, like, those are the main meta decks, right? And I'll talk about the actual meta of Meadowlands in another video and why those are kind of the best 6 decks. But for a deck like this, although it does have access to some really powerful tools and really interesting synchros, the problem of this deck kind of stems from the fact that while the synchro pool is decent, the Xyz pool is so much better. And while we can make use of some powerful Xyz tools like Lavalval Chain, this deck unfortunately does not have really consistent starters off a Lavalval Chain. Like, a chain helps you win games and it will help you get your resource loop online, but it does kind of require you to find other cards in order to make that resource loop actually function. Chain on its own is not going to be enough to start that, much like it is for a lot of other decks. Like, Chain to Stack or Chain to Send in multiple other decks in this format is a ridiculous amount of advantage. I'm thinking of things like Heraldic Beast, where you can go Chain to Send while also detaching a Heraldic Beast Leo so you can get an additional search. I'm thinking of things like Infernity, where you just have the ability of extending to absolutely no end. And that, while it does kind of rely on you having additional cards in your hand to make that work, it really doesn't matter because the monsters that you're getting to from that are so much better than the actual Psychic pool. However, I don't think that means that Psychic is dead in the water. I don't think it is nearly as bad as something like Scrap or a numerous amount of other decks, even some that I've talked about on the channel already. Like, I think that Birdman Mist Valley deck is probably worse than this. And while that deck has access to some crazy boards and some crazy bombs, I think this deck's ability to access its recursion really well is probably good enough to... I don't think it'll ever win a tournament, but I do think you could bring this to just like, if you want to play casuals with some people, I think this would be a fantastic deck to run casuals with, because not only does it play kind of low to the ground, it doesn't really do anything super unfair unless your opponent is playing a bunch of spell cards and you summon a Churia Beast, in which case then, sorry, I don't know, like, what I'm trying to get at is, if you ever find yourself playing Meadowlands and you're not looking to play the absolute top of the meta, like the far and away best things in the world, you want to play it like Heart of the Underdog style maybe, I think Psychics are a really solid pick, genuinely. I think this deck is really fun to pilot. It's got so many cool tools. A Psychic Jumper, especially on its own, just being really easy access to a creature swap effect is really, really sick. There are multiple different ways you can play this. You can adjust it to be more casual if you want to play like the Miracle Synchro Fusion package. If you want to play it how it was played more historically, you can play the TGs. There's just a lot to do with a deck like this. There's like the Macrocosmos build. You can tech in some funnier cards like Psychic Field Zone, so you can do the reverse Miracle Fusion from your Banished to the graveyard. This deck has a lot of potential to do a lot of really cool things, and while this is definitely not going to be the last time I talk about it, it is probably going to be generally where it stays in Meadowlands' general meta. I don't see anything really breaking this further, I think the general psychic pool is kind of weak, and we are kind of playing the best things that we could be playing. With all that touched on, I want to thank anyone who has stuck around for this long in this video, because we've been here for quite a while already. Genuinely, your support and your viewing this means so much to me. This is a format that I truly do adore, and I mentioned it earlier, but Meadowlands is like my favorite historical Yu-Gi-Oh format. And I really don't know why. Like, it's not a perfect format. I don't think it has the same like crazy draw to it that something like Edison does. It is kind of in a weird part of Yu-Gi-Oh's history that isn't really touched on that much, because right after it is the Dragon Rulers, and right before it is like Mermail stuff and like wind up in Zector format that people know for being just ridiculous and terrible to play through. This format kind of exists in a weird pocket where it feels like there is a lot of room for experimentation, because this card pool is so generally untested. And while Mermail and Fire Fist and decks like that are definitely like the really good decks in the room, there's so much out there that we just haven't actually had the chance to test with yet. There are so many decks that I want to talk about upcoming, like Heraldic Beast is one that I've already mentioned. There's a blind go second relinquished kaiju deck that I want to actually show off. That deck is extremely silly. There's Gishki running around. Hieratic Gishki is a really, really sick deck that I might bring to the channel relatively soon. There's just so much to talk about with a format like this, and I would love to see more people give it a try, because I genuinely think it's one of the most enjoyable ways to play Yu-Gi-Oh! So thank you all again so much for watching. Genuinely, it means the world to me. I don't know how often I'll be doing these really long deck profile things, this scrapyard as I'll be calling it, but I really did enjoy myself here. So that's it for this video, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye-bye!